Okay, so welcome everybody. If we have not met before, my name is Jen Clark, the Director of University Advising here at WVU. And I just wanted to welcome you to our completion degree update and training. We have some folks who are presenting here today to talk to you about some of the things that have changed or are relevant to the degree. This is important because we have a lot of new advisors as well who may not have encountered these before, and some folks who've been working with them for a long time who might be interested to know how things are structured now. So to start with, I'd like to introduce Dr. Scott Davidson, who will kick it off.
Hi, thanks, Joy. I'm going to share some slides off my desktop. Okay, I hope that's working for everyone. Let me pull that a little bit. Well, okay, so and just thanks for being here. I just wanted to say a few things briefly. I have class at 10:30, so I'm time limited. And I'm sure that our advising team of Nick and Samoa and Whitney can answer any questions that come up following the discussion of our programs. I want to just say a few sort of broad things about why I think completion matters from an institutional perspective, and about the sort of the importance of the topic that we're talking about today. It matters in terms of the rankings and how we're evaluated as an institution. It matters financially, of course, in helping student to persevere through completion. It impacts our overall enrollment, and it affects our broader institutional reputation and the types of perceptions that people have of WVU. And so completion is something that is kind of a responsibility, or ought to be a priority for all of us, staff, faculty, administration. From the student perspective, of course, I think it's important to remember, obviously, why it matters. I attend graduation with this group of students, and on graduation day, they are very happy to be graduating with a degree from WVU, though it might have been a rocky road for them to get there sometimes. And just thinking about, is it better to have a degree or not? Is it more useful to have a degree or not? And then how does completion influence the perception of the value of their investment of time and money with WVU? Think about the difference between the two statements. I attended for 4 years but didn't finish my degree. I finished my degree, but not in my original major. And I think that the overall satisfaction of one versus the other is going to be obvious. Okay, and so just some things that you all can do. I think Joy is going to talk about some scenarios in which it's important to have a conversation with students about a completion degree and a change of major. And then what I'm going to talk about just real briefly is how to find the right fit in order to send them according to their different needs. The Multidisciplinary Studies program is an academic unit, and we offer 3 different degrees that serve 3 slightly different populations. So we offer the Multidisciplinary Studies degree, we offer the Integrated Studies degree, and the Regents Bachelor's of Arts. Okay. And so each of those have slightly different features, and I'm going to run through those 3 different degree options and some of the main features. Okay, so with respect to the multidisciplinary studies degree, this is not a completion degree, I think, properly speaking. It is now, based on curricular changes that went into effect last year, more of a customized or designed degree. It includes, and we have MDS for both in-person and fully online degree options. So that may be an important factor to weigh for some students, for example, who can't be on campus, have to go home due to some family emergency or something like that. The online degree option with MDS can be a good fit for them. They have 12 required credits along with the 3 minors that they put together in order to solve some or to understand some complex problem or set of issues. And so it's a good fit for a student who's looking for something that's really customized to their specific needs and interests. I tend to think of this as being good for, especially good to start in your freshman or sophomore year, but it can be completed as a junior or senior, just depending on how far along they've progressed with the minors that they would be putting together. The integrated studies degree is a completion degree. And it's really focused on getting students to the required 120 credit hours. There are 9 credit hours that they take with us, and those focus on helping them to define themselves and be ready for the professional world. Okay, so a lot of goes into helping them to design resumes and cover letters and things that they need to do their job search. Okay, BIS students are enrolled as traditional on-campus students, and the BIS degree can, in some cases, be completed by seniors in 1 academic year or even in 1 semester, depending on, whether they're close to that 120 mark. They can get all 9 of their MDS credits in 1 semester because of how we roll out those courses each semester. So a couple of unique features of the BIS degree. One is F forgiveness. They can apply to have their Fs at WVU removed from their grade calculation, and credit for prior learning. They can create a portfolio that they submit to receive credit for previous work experience or learning that they may have had outside of academia. I think of this as a great option for students who would say, I just want to graduate. The RBA degree is a very unique and interesting program that I want to call your attention to. It is an online program that's designed for adult learners. It can serve as a completion degree and is a good fit for those who would need online delivery. So they don't have to be in Morgantown or in the vicinity in order to complete this degree. There is a requirement for admission that they have to be at least 3 years out of high school. But obviously, that would fit the case for some who are looking to complete. It also has F forgiveness and credit for prior learning. And with the adult learners that we have, many of them go through the portfolio process to receive credit for their prior work experience, and our instructors guide them on that process. And they can also get equivalency credit based on certifications and trainings that they might have done in their previous work life. Okay. And I think Joy mentioned that this can be a good option for students who are dealing with problems at third attempts. One thing to be aware of with the RBA is that it has a different gen ed from other courses or from other majors in the university, because its gen ed is set by the region, the RBA statewide program. So um, um, that could be an interesting tool for some of our students. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say, but just thank you for your attention, and I'll pass it over to Joy, who I think is going to talk more about scenarios in which, it might be the right fit for completion. So thanks.
So while I pull up my small PowerPoint, do people have questions for Scott while he's here about things that he may have said up to this point? Okay, if you think of them, right?
Very good, thank you.
So we know that it matters that students complete. It matters a lot, but getting them there is sort of another thing altogether, right? And let's talk a little bit about what this context is and why this matters as well. So how did we get here? We know that most of the traditional age college students are fully Gen Z now, and they're the most college-bound generation that we've ever had. In fact, the bottom end, or I should say the tail end of Gen Z, so 2007, those folks will be 18 years old this year. So all of our traditional college age students are fully Gen Zs. And according to the national results, these students change their major as many as 3 times. 7 times was me in my undergrad year. As many as 3 times over the course of their college career. 80% of them change majors at least once. I think many of us who've worked new student orientation would say that they changed their major 3 times during new student orientation alone, right? But there's a lot of change, and major change is typically related to fit and discovery. So a student gets here and realizes, I picked this major, it's not really what I thought it was going to be, or what I thought I wanted to do, or I took this great gen ed class, I found something that's a better fit for me, what I like to learn, what I want to do. And so those students have typically made that decision on their own. It's full of energy. They've done some exploration. They may feel excitement. They've prepared for it. But sometimes people are forced to change majors, and that's sort of where we come to with the completion degree as well, right? And there are plenty of signs that a student may need to transition. Among them, of course, is the biggest one, which is failure to progress academically. And we see this in the system early on. Students may be receiving early alerts in critical gateway courses that they cannot pass. They're getting midterm grades that they can't convert to better completion. They can't pass those critical gateway courses, and so they're failing to progress, right? Hand in glove, they're typically failing to utilize resources that aid in that progression. So they may not be going to tutoring, they may not be going to office hours or doing the things that they need to stay on top of their classes, right? And then, of course, we see a lot of magical thinking. So this could be, I can make it up, right? By the end of the semester, I can get it all in. They drop the lowest grade. They drop the lowest test. My personal favorite is I work better under pressure. It's my favorite because it's the one I like to use all the time, and it still doesn't work. And I still resort to it from time to time, right? So a lot of magical thinking that goes on. And then in a lot of cases, there is just a failure or even a flat out refusal to explore other options. And there's actually an academic definition and term for students who are this way, right? And they are considered foreclosed students. So the definition of a foreclosed student is a student who is steadfastly dedicated to admission to a particular program and no other. So attachment without any consideration of their other options at all. And when they're denied this goal, it does create a crisis. So it's not really related to foreclosure in the sense we might think of like a mortgage or a home, right? But in a way, the metaphor still sort of works. If they're not putting in the academic credit, someone is coming and taking it away from them, right? And just like losing a piece of property would be traumatic, being told that you have to leave a major can be a crisis for students. But I was interested to find that there is actually a term that's about 25 years old to describe students in this situation. Other ways to look at this would be that it wouldn't necessarily be the major the student is committed to staying in. It could also be a career, right? They may be very certain about this choice, but they've not really fully considered their other options. So the characteristics of a foreclosed student, in addition to some of the signs and markers that we've just seen and talked about, limited research, not just about the program or the career that they've chosen, but most often also about their own interests and strengths and abilities. They don't really know what they're good at, or they think that they're better at something than maybe they are, and they haven't really done a lot of research into that. They're also very high commitment, what our fantastic colleague Kit Connor would say, passionately determined, right? Which is a flag I often see in DegreeWorks notes that means I'm really committed to this particular vision of myself and I don't want to let it go. And they also have immature identity, or in some cases, pseudo identity, which goes along with, student development theory in that immature identity often do not have high self-awareness. It should seem really obvious that they're not passing their classes. This is not a good fit, and yet they don't seem to see it that way, right? Whereas a pseudo identity is more of a superficial identity, fitting in with a group, pressure from family. So students who will say things like, everyone in my family is a doctor, or students who refer to themselves as the job without actually having attained the credential. So I'm an engineer, I'm a nurse, even though they may be very early in their program and not actually completing those requirements, right? A very basic example would be students who over-identify with being a student. So they're always engaging, always raising their hand, but they're not actually thinking very much about the topic. They may not even be doing the reading or have much to contribute, but they sure do want to engage, right? So those are typically the examples of what a foreclosed student looks like. Another example would be students who claim that they're much better hands-on than they are academically. So they're failing academically, but if you just put me in a lab, I'm really good, right? And all of this is really sort of related to students who function okay or even well in a really controlled situation. But when it comes time to make independent decisions, critical thinking, application, they do not do well at all and have a lot of trouble adjusting. So those classes that require them to apply their knowledge, they're usually having a very difficult time there. Of course, this will present challenges. As you can see our little boat here, it's not going anywhere, right? And some of the challenges of working with foreclosed students are most obviously being in educational limbo. So students are not progressing through the major, for example. They're not meeting their benchmarks. They freeze up when you talk about alternative planning. They're repeating a lot of their key courses and they're just not getting through. Another challenge is attrition. It is very true that we do lose students, not a lot of students, but because some programs are able to transition students a little more strongly than others are. But, sometimes we've all had that experience where a student says, if I don't get back into this class, I'm just going to go somewhere else and I'm going to try it there, right? And that does cost the institution, and in some cases it's unavoidable, but it also really costs the student. It costs them in non-transferable classes, it sets them back, and so in some cases they have to start over. If they're not successful with us, it is not usually the case that they can just go on and be successful in the exact same program somewhere else, right? So ideally, we can help provide them an off-ramp so that they can get to a place where they can be more successful. And then, of course, it causes an identity crisis. If a student has been talking about being a nurse pretty much all through high school, at the Thanksgiving dinner table, at all the places where someone asks them, what are you going to do with your life? And now suddenly that path is closed down to you, it can spark a real identity crisis for students who've been really fixated on this idea, in some cases for years. there was something in the literature that I do want to read to you because I thought it was just so good. And it's very short. Well, not very short, but it's short. The advisor is placed in the unique and challenging position of being the face of the problem and the face of the possible solution. They serve on the front line for their college and are the human embodiment of the rejection notice. They bear the brunt of the student experience. They also bear a significant responsibility from the institution to function as the humanitarian problem solver and as the retention measure for the student who has been or will be rejected. And I'm sure we've all felt sort of caught on both fronts, right? We are the face of the problem and the face of the solution. So how do we move away from being the human embodiment of the rejection notice? There are some tactics for working with foreclosed students and helping them grapple with this identity crisis, which is really just a function of helping them explore themselves and their options in a little more detail. And some of this comes from our motivational interviewing strategies that we had last semester as part of a professional development, but from other literature as well. Obviously, active listening is the start of this. So what stories are students telling about themselves and others about the reason they want this pathway? Is there something in their story that is transferable to another major or outcome? We also are in the position of helping them eliminate false constructs, primarily by pointing them toward resources and challenging some of their notions in a gentle way. So a student may say something like, my family will be so disappointed in me. And that's usually not the case, but for some students it is. And if they need help negotiating that conversation, we can point them to the Kruth Center for specific problem solving. Or they may say, they may not quite be at the end of the line yet and just say, I can't do this, right? In which case we can point them to their available resources to help them do this, or we can give them to other colleagues like our career services folks who can help them look through ONET, search salaries, other similar job descriptions, getting them armed with data they need to have a fuller picture of what they're getting into or what the alternatives might be, right? And all of that is part of active planning and helping them with homework. So what sort of institutional resources can they explore to help them make this decision? If they're passionately committed to being a doctor, will they passionately commit to go to the Aspire office and explore what it really takes to get into med school, right? What kinds of conversations may they need to have in the future? And can they practice those conversations with you? It can be very empowering for a student to just practice a couple of times with you, and you can say, I'll be you and you can be your mother. Tell me what it is she's going to say, and I'll tell you what I would probably say. And then you can switch roles. And the comfort with that sometimes helps students see that they do have a false narrative about how their family may react to them. All of this, of course, is about helping them build adaptability. How did you manage a hurdle before? What can you use from that experience to help you now? Who do you go for guidance when things are tough? Can you go to that person now? And helping them realize that they have these skills and can also develop them, right? Of course, the best tip ever, document absolutely everything, right? This is especially true if the student is at the end of the road and needs to move to some sort of completion degree. If a student can come back, we need to document exactly what it's going to take for them to come back, right? If there's a certain GPA they have to hit, a certain grade in certain sets of courses, they need that spelled out really, really clearly. And similarly, if they can't come back, they need to know that clearly as well. Document your tactics. I see a lot of good work in this in DegreeWorks notes about students saying they're going to go to tutoring or office hours or Aspire or whatever. And then not only does that sort of provide a record for anyone who would happen to look at it, but it gives you a jumping off point too the next time you meet the student and things are still the same. Well, you said that you were going to use this tactic. It doesn't look like in Navigate you've had any swipes. Can you tell me what's going on there? And of course, if the student won't pursue tactics, and many of them will not, you've at least got the documentation that you tried to move them along. And then the next set of decision makers, whether it's that course attempt appeal or what have you, they've got the notes to look at to see that the student has been encouraged in these things, and can have a conversation with the student, because often with a course attempt appeal, if a student is asking for multiple attempts, they'll say, I'll go to tutoring And then you, not you necessarily, but the decision maker can point back and say, your advisor's been asking about that for a year now. Can you tell me what's in the way of that, right, to help students move along? My last slide. Tips for a warm transition. Of course, we want every student to have a warm transition, but some of the best practices for making that actually happen are walking students through their available resources online. Not just saying, here's a catalog link, but let's pull it up together. Let's look at what a typical plan of study might look like. You don't have to advise in other majors that aren't within your own purview, but it can kind of help if a student has that safe spot with you to explore for just a few minutes about what that could look like. Similarly, with the DegreeWorks What If, flip it around so they can see maybe what their courses are going to look like, with the caveat that some of this could change. Maybe the department can make exceptions in some cases or what have you. You don't have to do a full advising session on a major that's not your own, but that comfort with looking at the resources with someone they trust goes a long way. Again, document everything, document what's discussed, what's possible, spell things out very clearly. And then when you do the handoff, of course, always work with the protocol of your college. Never just change a student's major and don't tell somebody about it, right? But when you do follow that protocol, it can be really helpful if you also refer to a colleague. I know that when I work with returning students who are literally just a few credits away from their original degree and they're switching, for example, to the RBA just so they can be done, I always tell them about Samoa. And they have trust in me because we figured this out, but I always give Samoa credit because she's the one who does the work of flipping their degree works around and putting things where they belong and identifying the minors that they might actually be able to have. And I talk up her knowledge and I tell them she will go to bat for you and figure out what can be done, and she'll advocate for you if she sees an exception. And that extends the trust they have with me to her. So even if a student's not going to a completion degree, if you know someone in that department, even if that person's not initially going to be their advisor, you can tell the student, I know several people there and they do really good work. And that's an extension of the trust that they have in you, right? And so meeting your colleagues so that you can give students more detail about where they're going, likely to see, helps them feel very positive about this transition. It helps them accept the reality that they're moving cases. That's good for morale overall, but it also helps the student accept the change and move along, right? And we have plenty of ways that you can meet your colleagues, either through Teams or other methods, right? Events that we have, go to lunch together. All of that really helps us keep students going and get to the finish line. So I'm going to stop here. I see the chat that says you can hardly hear me, which is great. That's wonderful. But I will some questions while Nick decides he is going to pull up any slides that he has.
Yeah, I will. First, I do want to just echo what you said about, we're happy to meet with students, and this is kind of the tip of the iceberg. Scott talked a little bit about our degrees, and I know it can be there's a lot of acronyms, and it's kind of confusing. What is RBA, BIS? So this is a good start, but if you do have any questions and stuff, we're happy to meet with folks. The number of students I've met with who have come over here, and now we're in Hodges. We used to be over in Arnold, but we're central, we're so happy about that. And it's also so much easier for students to drop by, and while they're over here. So don't hesitate to reach out to us. All of our emails, or at least mine, is super long. So I just tell people to go to our website, which I'll put up here in a bit. You can reach out to me that way and refer students. And it's a really nice, I like to sit down with students. A lot of times we'll sit down and students it's almost like now they have permission to think about another option. And you can sort of see the body language of like this sense of relief. Not everybody, but sometimes students will say like, okay, so I can finish this in a semester and be done with a degree. And say, yeah, that's true. And sometimes we talk about minors, sometimes the major they're coming from, they can complete a minor, or they're almost there, they've even done it without even really intending that. So, again, I'm happy to meet with folks, and at any point. I do want to talk about a couple of things. Scott had the idea of the portfolio has come up a couple of times. So I put together a couple of things on some of our unique kind of credit options, I call them. And I'm going to go ahead and just run through these, and I'm happy to take questions and such when and if you have them. Oh, can you see my slides, or am I? Okay, cool. Again, with this kind of stuff, feel free to reach out, because it can also, when I started doing this, it took me a while to wrap my head around how any of this worked. So don't feel like you've got to do that. We'll do that part of it. One of the ones that we get a lot is credit for military service. And this is really open, I think, to every student at WVU, but our programs tend to be more, we can utilize these credits a lot more, particularly with RBA. We have a lot of students that come in with many, many years of military service, and they want to use those credits toward the degree, because the RBA, as Scott mentioned, is sort of under the purview of the West Virginia Higher Education Policy Commission. We have a little bit different kind of rules with things like residency and such. So we can use a lot of these military credits. And we do have a lot of students that do that. The discussion, like I say, is really important, though, because how we use those, it's going to depend. There are some residency requirements, as I mentioned. Students have to take a certain number of credits from West Virginia institutions. So, they can't come in and just get a degree with their military service if they've never taken any classes here. But at the same time, we can utilize a lot of those. Sometimes their goals are different, and we want to sit down and talk with them about that. If they want to do a particular graduate program, sometimes it's important for us to talk about what are the admission requirements for that? Are there certain classes that you need? And we can fit those into what they're doing here. So, and sometimes it's more credits than, if there's a lot of credits, we may end up bringing in fewer credits from their joint services transcript. So we sit down and talk with them. Once they're on their WVU transcript, we can't take them off, though. So that's why we want to plan ahead and sit down and have that conversation about what their goals are, what their next step is, and so that we can bring in the right number of credits that's not going to preclude any options. Sometimes they're getting tuition assistance from the military. We don't want credits we've brought in from the JST to mean they can only take X number of classes here. So we want to give them the opportunities to be as flexible as we can. If, sometimes it helps to bring those in later on to have students take some classes here and then say, okay, you've got this kind of bank of credits we can pull from if we need to, let's figure out what your plans are, and then we'll pull those in at a later time as you're closer to graduation. Again, we're happy to sit down and we'll talk with students about this. But if you do have a student that has some military credit and they're trying to figure out how they might best use them, refer them over to us. We can talk about some of those options, particularly with RBA. The portfolio is one that you heard about a little bit. This is I want to stress, this is my second point, should have been the first. Sometimes students come in and say, hey, I'm an RBA student. I heard I can get credit for life experience. I've had an awesome life. Doesn't really work that way, right? This is, when students write a portfolio, they're putting their their work experience in the context of learning outcomes that they would have met from a class. So we have a really structured process where our students that write a portfolio will take MDS 301. It's called integrative writing. And in this class, they'll work pretty closely with the instructor to create a narrative that explains, in the context of my work, I utilized some of these theories and methods from, let's say, communication studies. And they'll write about those, show examples of those, et cetera. And then we really value, our colleagues across campus, because let's say if it's a comm studies portfolio, we'll have faculty review that portfolio and say, yes, we can award, X number of credits for this portfolio, based on the work this student has done. And it really is a thorough review process. It's not just, credits for your life, but what you've actually done. We allow RBA students and and MDS students to do, or not MDS, sorry, RBA and BIS students to do portfolios. But, you know, because the basis is your professional experience, a lot of our BIS students are traditional college age students, and they may not have had that kind of extensive professional experience that somebody who's you know, been in the workforce for 10 or 15 years and is coming back to finish a degree. That's a very different type of experience. So really, you know, while it's open to BIS students, most of the time the students that do write portfolios are in the RBA degree. We have as I mentioned, it's very structured. So students take MDS 301, they get started writing that portfolio. If they're writing a longer portfolio, because certain classes you can get, you know, up to maybe 9 credits, that's a much longer portfolio. So sometimes they do have to take a course in a following semester to finish up that portfolio. So a student that comes in doing RBA, you know, sometimes expects, hey, I'm going to get this degree in a semester, and they want to write a portfolio for a lot of credits. It sometimes takes longer than that just to make sure they're going through this thorough process so that those credits can be awarded. That additional course, typically it's in the following semester. We offer the MDS 301, the integrated writing course, fall, spring, and summer. We also offer the follow-up course, fall, spring, and summer. So students can really work on this when they need to. I did see a question in the chat. How many credits can a student earn through the portfolio process? It depends, you know, there's not a quick answer to that. I've had students do a portfolio for 3 credits, 6 credits, 9 credits. Then I've had students do another portfolio after they did the first one, which is an option that not a lot of students do. Sometimes they get through the first one and say, enough, that was a lot of writing. Glad I did it, got this great experience, but my next step is, you know, I'm going to write a shorter one, or I'm done with that. So the portfolio is, you know, it's a good option. It depends on the student's goals as well. If a student needs to take courses through WVU for their residency requirement, those have to be courses. They can't be credits from the portfolio. So sometimes students end up not doing it because they say, hey, I need to get 24 credits at WVU. The credits portfolio sounds cool, but those are not actual classes that I took in the state of West Virginia. So it depends on the particular student. And we also, trying to advance my slide. There we go. We have credit for prior learning as well. These are things like certifications, licenses, other types of training. I have to explain the picture. This is a FEMA training that I thought was kind of cool looking. And, you know, we can review those for possible credit. So the American Council on Education, ACE, reviews lots of different certifications, licenses, et cetera, and will give a recommendation. It says, you know, perhaps this FEMA certification combined with that one will be worth 2 credits. So we can review those and decide, you know, recommend to the registrar. We would say this credit is, you know, based on ACE recommendations, this certification this student did, you know, maybe it was part of their employment, but we can recognize that and say we can award some credits for that. This can take a little bit of time because we may have to look up the various parts of the certification, or, you know, see where they, you know, where it was awarded and that kind of thing. So again, when we meet with students, we'll say, hey, if you've got whatever documentation you have, get that together, you know, a PDF, or whatever it is that you've got, and send it to us. We will review it. It may go to, you know, the advisor will do an initial review. It may go to our curriculum committee to take a look at it, and then they'll send it on to the registrar. So it's not something that's immediate. Sometimes it takes, you know, a couple of months to go through it. Sometimes they've got to make phone calls. Sometimes they've got to do other kind of outreach to really find out what the, you know, what the training entailed, what the certification really was all about. So, you know, we tell students that up front. This might take a little bit of time, so be patient. You know, if there's questions you have, let us know. They'll ask us about how do I document certain things, and we're happy to talk about them with that. You know, it's a process, and we'll tell them that up front. And we try not to make any promises of you're going to get 25 credits for this and you can be out of here in a year. We don't really do that. Instead, it's that let's sit down and see what you've got and see, will this apply to your degree? Will this help you with your goals? It's not, sometimes students just want to get the degree as quickly as they can. Other times there's other things they want to do along the way. So those are important conversations to have. And we're happy to do those. As I mentioned, we're happy to talk with folks, with students, with colleagues across campus. That's our website. All of our emails are on there. So I meet with students from all of our majors, MDS, RVA, BIS. Samoa works mostly with RVA students, and our other colleague, Whitney, that's here, Whitney Shakuri-Rada, also works with MDS, RVA, and BIS. So we're happy to meet with your students if you send them over, or to answer your questions too. So please let us know when and if you have questions or anything, and we're happy to meet with folks. So there's questions, and I was trying to keep up as I was talking, but hard to do that. So please let us know. I mean, we can look at chat. You can feel free to ask whatever you want to do, but the three of us, Samoa, Whitney, and I are happy to answer those.
So we do have a question about credits from an unaccredited institution, and would they be able to count towards credit through RBA or BIS? And Samoa has answered they need to be accredited, but not necessarily regionally accredited. Would you be able to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and Samoa, if you want to jump in, we'll take a look at some of those credits to see how they might apply, and it will go through that credit for prior learning process the same way that we would review certifications or licenses or other kind of trainings, and make that request to the registrar if we can apply these through RBA. Now, I haven't done that for a BIS student. I actually don't know if we can do it for BIS or not. I'd have to go look that up. But for RBA students, we've definitely I've done a few of those myself.
Hi, I have a quick question. Sorry, I couldn't find the hand to raise. I apologize. And so kind of to Joy's earlier point, we work with a lot of students who maybe have a very set idea of what they want to do, but they're not meeting it at the undergrad level. Is it possible for students to move from BIS and RBA and into potentially master's programs or higher, something a higher level in a field that they might be a little bit more tied to?
Yeah, and folks can jump in, but we have a lot of students that complete, RBA and BIS and go on to grad school. That's something I talk about with students, because sometimes they'll come in and say, I was in this other major, it's going to take me 3 years to finish that. It looks like with BIS, I could finish up in a year, but I want to do this particular grad program. And so sometimes we'll even look at admission requirements for some example programs, and, they've got to have a strong GPA. We'll talk about that a little bit. Sometimes there's certain course requirements that they'll have to take. But, I think it's encouraging for students to see a lot of programs say, you need to have a bachelor's degree from a regionally accredited institution to be eligible for this program. Then we'll talk about, okay, cool, that's the minimum that's there. What other things do you have? Like, what would you talk about in your kind of personal statement, or what, who will write you a good letter of recommendation? If you don't have somebody, let's build on that, because, it is a little bit of a different degree. So students sometimes have to explain a little bit about what is integrated studies actually mean, and how can you support a strong application? What are things we can do right now that will allow you to do that? But we do have quite a few students that have gone on to graduate programs.
And just to add a little bit of something I see with BIS students that we haven't gotten to touch on yet, I also called integrated studies a landing point. So I meet with a lot of students who are looking to switch within undergrad. So if you have a student who, let's say, is a chemistry major and they haven't taken a lot of bio courses yet and they decide, hey, I really want to become a biology major. Once if they're already at WVU and have a certain number of required credits, they would actually come, and I kind of explained to them, they kind of come and sit with me for a little bit. They have to have Chem 115 the lab, Bio 15, Bio 17 with the labs, all at a C- or better, 2.0, before we can switch them into bio if they've already been at WVU and they're not a first-time freshman. And so that's something else. If you have a student in your major who, for whatever reason, decides they might want to switch their major, if what they want to go to has admissions requirements that they might need to spend a semester or possibly a year working on, a lot of those students come and work with me, and that's kind of what I see almost probably more than 50% of the time. I see a lot of students going for the completion. I see students coming from other majors who are trying to get them, graduated, but I also see a lot of students who are looking to switch their major. And so I kind of tell them, I feel like the easiest way to explain it is I'm kind of a landing point. They sit with me for maybe anywhere from 6 to 12 months. We look at prerequisites for whatever major they're going into or want to go into. We also look at, sometimes they're just working on GPA. Maybe the major they want to switch to requires a 2.25, a 2.5. So they'll sit with me for a little bit. A lot of times, I spend every day in DegreeWorks What If. And so we might look at what are the classes required for this major. If we're working on your GPA, you can go ahead and take, for example, a Crim 232, or you can take the Soc 101 or an Anthropology 105. So we usually work very, very hard to have them take classes within the major they want to go to while they're sitting in integrated studies. And then the second grades come out. If they have reached those requirements, that's when I can switch their major. So you might have seen things from me before that a student came from me to you. That means that, they've reached the prerequisites needed for your program. And if you ever have any questions whatsoever about that, if you have a student who's maybe thinking about that and they want to talk to somebody in integrated studies first, I would be more than happy to meet with them. Like I said, about probably 50% of the students I see, that's what they're looking towards, is they're going from one place to another. So feel free to reach out to me if you need help with that.
So I'll ask a question. I noticed Freddie had his hand up. I'm assuming he might have wanted to talk about the landing point part, or maybe he had an interruption, but feel free to put your hand up if you have. Did that cover it, Freddie? Were you basically, yeah.
I was just going to ask about that. So Whitney, you were perfect timing. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Great, absolutely.
I'm hoping that you'll speak a little bit about how you combat stigma around completion degrees, because I know that for some of our students, they feel, I worked with one, for example, who graduated in December and had a tiny existential crisis for about 3 minutes and said, I didn't earn this. And I pointed out to him, these are all your credits. I didn't give something to you. You did earn this, right? But there's sort of there can be a stigma related to completion degrees, and I'm curious how you all might approach talking about those with students who are feeling really foreclosed and not willing to move on.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is just really trying to look for the positives and explain to them that it is still a bachelor's degree. I'm very much a glass half full person, so I try to look at it from that perspective of you are still graduating, you still have a bachelor's degree, you still have tons of options. Try to gently explain, it is always better to finish versus stopping. A lot of the students I see might have 80 or 90 credits. So it's always better to finish and have that degree. I try to talk to them about what do they want after, they finish this bachelor's degree. And if they look to go to grad school, that door is not closed. If there's a certain job they're looking at, then we can always look at, is there a minor we can add in? Within integrated studies, you can have 1, 2, 3 minors, however many you like. And so I just try to really focus on the positives of you're still graduating, you're still getting a bachelor's degree. It's still, fully accredited from WVU. Grad school is still an option. Careers are still an option. If you are looking for a career that's maybe a little specialized, for example, like a marketing, we can add a marketing minor. And I just talk to students about about, when they're applying for these jobs, we want to say, still have the degree, still got the 120 credits, and then they can also add in there if they have that minor or the focus, but they are still getting a degree. They did still put in the work. And so that's what we really try to focus on, is that you did still do this. Might not be what was originally intended as a major, but still have that degree in hand. It's still, they did put in the work, and it's just talking to them and trying to see like all the doors that are still open versus focusing on maybe the 1 or 2 doors that might be closed.
And I'll add to that. I think one of the things I try to work with students to recognize is that you have all the skills that you have gotten you got from these classes. And when you're getting a job, most folks are, hopefully not hiring a degree, they're hiring the person. And when you sit down and you have that interview, you can talk about those skills that you earned over the course of your time here. And the idea of integrated, it's in the name, integrated studies. You're taking all of these credits that you had and putting together something that's unique. There's not somebody else that may have the same types of classes you took. And part of what we try to do in our integrated writing course is tie those together. And how do you write a cover letter that will, that shows some of these skills that you've had and how they have combined to create this, this educational experience that you've had. And that's what you're selling. You're not necessarily selling the degree, but all of the pieces that comprise it. And, I think it takes some time for students to see that, but I do think that a lot of students will come to that realization. I do have all this stuff that I've done, and I've had outside experiences. Sometimes with, particularly with RBA students, sitting down and talking with them about their stories is pretty amazing. I mean, I meet with people, the appointments I have with people who are in active duty, and they'll say, well, I can't tell you where I am, but I'm happy you're meeting with me, and I'm like, okay, don't, but that's cool to hear that. And, those experiences are important too. And the degree is one thing, but how you're, utilizing those skills from that, I think, are another thing.
Yeah, just kind of, to reinforce what my colleagues already said. I'll do the same thing. And with the younger people, they always want to think, oh, because I wanted to be this. And, like Nick said, it's not the degree that you're trying to sell, but yourself and your skills. And sometimes I let them see, I talk about my experience. When I finished my undergraduate in agronomy, yes, I graduated top % of class, but when I went home, there was all the time this nervousness. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I don't know if I know anything. So, because you keep thinking, I don't have the experience. But as you start working, then you see the knowledge, the things that you learn start flowing. You have to do this. Oh, when I did this work, it comes together. So I always try to bring a little bit of the personal experience to make them see that, this is possible, because I didn't do a completion degree, but I had this same kind of nervousness. And with the older folks, sometimes they feel, well, it's a little bit too late. They want to beat themselves down. And I say, you know what? You earned it. Don't feel like that, because you can tell somebody, I have an undergraduate. You have some return on your investment, because this is something that nobody can take away from you. You can't say that I went to college and didn't finish. And from this point, you can go on and do other things. You can go to grad school. And then, of course, with RBA, we have tons and tons of examples of people that, did so many things, lawyers, even went on all the way to medical school. Some people went to PhD. Even this institution is full of people that was RBA. So, I tell them all these, and then, then they change and they feel better about themselves. And the other thing I always encourage them to do, come to the commencement if you can, because it kind of, it's, oh, I'm too old, it's too late. I said, no, it's not the same as high school graduation. Come to your commencement, because this is something that you have to be proud for your children, your family. And when they come, they always thank me. They said, really, the feeling was different, so it's tough sometimes, but once we talk to them and let them see other people that did it and what they can do, and maybe they can make this horizontal move, like, okay, there is a position, but they're asking for undergrad. I couldn't before, but now I can, so then they feel better about it.
Awesome. Yeah, I worked graduation this past cycle, and it is a very powerful experience to see all the RBA students lining up and marching out. So any other questions for our colleagues while they're here? any last minute caveats also. For example, I know sometimes students are shocked when their program is switched to online and they don't realize that it might actually be a little more expensive, although that's not always the case for a student.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I'm glad you brought it up. So that is sometimes a surprise to students, especially before I really realized what online meant when I first started. I learned the hard way a couple times and now understand. The tuition structure is different. For an online student, for some, like the RVA students will pay $477 a credit. We're used to when students hit full time in an in-person degree, and then they're at 12 credits and they say, I want to take 15, it costs the same. But for online programs, they pay for every credit. So if a student is taking 15 credits, it does cost more than 12 credits. And so that's something we try to let them know up front, look at the tuition structure, think about that, talk with folks at financial aid, and, we refer folks over there all the time. But I would say it's important too, if you're talking to a student that wants to go to an online program, that's a little thing, but, and we'll talk with them about it, but if they know that coming in, something to be aware of.
Okay, if we don't have any other questions, I would just like to thank our colleagues for helping us get our arms around some of the changes with the completion degrees and some tips for helping students move toward that if that is where they are. We are recording this, and as soon as the recording is available and some of the PowerPoint materials, we will also host that on the website for colleagues who are not able to join live today. Thank you guys so much. Stay warm and have a great day.